Hi there, it's Alastair here. Now, we recorded this episode of Question Time on Tuesday morning, would normally have gone out on Thursday, but then along came Rishi Sunak, announced his decision to call an election on Wednesday afternoon in the pouring rain, without an umbrella, with Things Can Only Get Better blaring in the background. This episode includes some, I hope, interesting, enjoyable discussion on both national and international politics, as well as a full breakdown of what Rory got up to on his 11-day silent meditation retreat. I'd also like to say it's worth bearing in mind that we recorded the discussion on the Mexican presidential election before the news broke about the awful death of at least 9 people, possibly more by the time this goes out, at a rally on Thursday in Nuevo Leon. Anyway, we'll see you next week as we count down to the election on July the 4th. There'll be lots more podcasts between now and then, planned and thus far unplanned. Enjoy this one. All the best.
Welcome to the Restless Politics Question Time with me, Rory Stewart.
And me, Alastair Campbell. And Rory, I want to start with Adrian RP. Can we hear about Rory's retreat, please? Where was it? What happened? How was it? I should tell you before you answer, I was speaking at the Inverness Chamber of Commerce, and I did one of my Ask Alastair Anything things where they all have postcards and they all submit questions, got hundreds of questions, got loads about your retreat. And the one I asked of the audience was, somebody asked me if I would ever consider doing an 11-day retreat, sitting cross-legged for 14 hours a day. And I said, I just couldn't even think about it. And I asked the audience if they would do it. And there were 352 people there. And it was 351 to 1. One being, yes, I would do it. In fact, they had done it. So it's quite a rare thing that you do. Just tell us why and what.
Just to explain quickly for listeners what happens. You in this case, it's in Herefordshire, 45 men in a separate facility. There are women in another facility, so this is just men.
My God, you can't even mix a bit.
Can't mix a bit. You're sharing room. You're also sharing toilet facilities, showers, kind of communal toilets, showers. So it's a bit like being back at some kind of institution. You are woken by gong at 4 a.m. And
4.
So you have to be down and meditating at 4:30. So you do 2 hours without a break, then you take a little break, then you do 3 hours meditating, then you take a break, then you do 4 hours meditating without a break, then you take a break, and then you do 3.5 hours, and then you go back to your room.
So do you talk to anybody?
You're not allowed to talk, you're not allowed to make eye contact, and you're not allowed to eat after about 11:30 in the morning.
So did not one single person make eye contact and say, I love the podcast?
No, I was vaguely aware, of course, and that was one of the things that made it a bit weirder for me, that some of the people clearly kind of recognized me, because when you arrive, before you've sort of settled in, it isn't full silence. And sure enough, at the end of it, there was a young man who said, I'm in Foreign Office, and a couple of people who said that they'd done the retreat because they'd heard on the podcast about the retreat. But it is the most incredible experience. I mean, I think one of the things that I noticed is the way that your mind produces a narrative. So in my case, I went from, in this particular case, from, day 2, oh my goodness, this is so beautiful, it's spring, the blackbirds. Day 3, my life is completely meaningless. I'm going to die. I'm achieving nothing. I'm at a total dead end. I've got no idea what I'm doing for the next 20, 30 years of my life. Day 4, this is so boring. This is boring beyond belief, my life. Day 6, oh my goodness, look at that snail on the tree. I'm appreciating the beauty of nature. Day 8, I'm got this great scheme for how I'm going to change the world. And then somewhere in the middle of it, days of incredible pain, because if you're sitting, as I was for, I guess it's 14 hours a day, cross-legged, and you're not used to it, your knees and your back begin screaming. You do something called aditana, which means that you commit to not moving for an hour. You can't shift position for an hour. So you sit there, and if you get it wrong, your right knee can end up trembling, and end up feeling almost sort of physically sick with the kind of pain of the not removing your right knee.
And you pay to do this?
No, it's free.
It's free?
It's completely free. I mean, the voluntary contribution at the end, but anyone can do it. And the mixture of people was really striking. You know, there was somebody who'd been a bit in trouble with law. There were like novelists. There were climbers, outdoor instructors, business people. I mean, it was very difficult to generalize. Very working class men. I mean, it was, and of course, you're because 10.5 days you can't speak. You're just looking at these people, and you're thinking, I wonder who he is. You know, here's this kind of big, muscly young man with a lot of tattoos. Wonder who he is. You know,
but you can't talk.
You can't talk. You're trying to work out.
I don't think I could not talk. I think I'd find that impossible.
That's what my 7-year-old said.
And what did they think about you going off and leaving them for?
Well, so they've watched Kung Fu Panda, and Kung Fu Panda meditates. Not very successfully, but they've got a sort of link to that.
Well, it's very good to have you back.
Thank you.
I'm still not going to try it.
No,
it's really not for me.
No.
Do you feel better?
No, unfortunately, in this case, something went a bit wrong. I came out the other end and started a sort of 2-day migraine. I get very bad migraines.
Right.
And the problem was that I slept about 3 hours a night.
Right.
Well, here's a question for you. So, question from Ava. What do we think about the potential of a new presidenta in Mexico?
Well, we are. We're going to have the first woman president, almost certainly, because the two leading candidates are both women. And given that she's currently almost 30 points ahead in the polls, almost Keir Starmer-style lead, it's probably going to be the first Jewish leader of the Mexican state as well, Claudia Sheinbaum, who's going to take over from one of those rare leaders who is known the world over in politics by his initials, AMLO, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. One Mexican constitution, you're only allowed one term as president. But this election, you've got all the seats in the Senate, all 500 seats in the lower house, local congresses in 31 states, 9 state governorships, and the mayoralty of Mexico City, all on the ballot on the same day. And it kind of depends who you talk to. There are some people who love AMLO and think he's the sort of man of the people who's delivered for them and helped the poor. And there are others who basically
he's a bit on the populist left.
He's a proto-populist
yeah.
left-wing leader. And there are many who I was speaking to somebody in Mexico the other day who basically says this guy has essentially corruptly co-opted the state to himself and his party. And there is nowhere in the world that Sheinbaum's not going to win. And, you know, a lot of tax...
Because she's from his sort of proto-populist left-wing party.
Yeah. She's and very, very close to him and has supported all his positions. So I think we're definitely talking about it's one of those elections where we pretty much, a bit like Modi, a bit like Putin, we know the outcome.
But the stakes very, very high. Because of that huge US border, because of the incredible stories around Mexican criminality, the importance of the Mexican economy. I mean, as the US decouples, de-risks from China, more and more US manufacturing moving into Mexico as the compensation for moving out of China, which is a huge opportunity for a new Mexican president.
His critics, they also criticize both sides of the American debate for essentially not calling out some of the stuff that they would call out with other countries, because they basically just look to him to kind of to deliver on his side of the bargain vis-a-vis the border.
Which ditto, I suppose, with Modi. It's the sense that the US can be pretty hypocritical with allies that they think.
Absolutely. So it's a big one. That's on June the 2nd. His party, National Regeneration Movement, Morena. And of course, it's a pretty young democracy. They had the same party in power for decades. If you talk to his critics, they basically say he's done all the stuff that the populists do. He's put his supporters in the key positions, judicial reform. He wants judges in future to be elected by a party that's winning lots of votes, and also wants to change the way the electoral commission is run. So it's pretty much the usual stuff. And of course, we've talked on the podcast before about how he has co-opted the military to do quite a lot of infrastructure work, quite a lot of the sort of domestic policy stuff. And that is something that, on the one hand, has proven quite popular because the military are pretty good at delivering stuff, but also he now wants to extend their mandate well past 2028. So it's a big, big, big changing country, and it's an election result where I think we're pretty clear about what the outcome's going to be. And we talked in the discussion about mental health and our MPs. Maybe just a more sobering point. Ahead of the 2021 midterms in Mexico, 30 candidates were assassinated. And in these elections so far, locally and in the mayoralties, 24 candidates have been killed. So you're talking about, and that's partly about political rivalries, but it's also about the impact of the role of organised crime.
Okay, now let's come on to a question that I'm really interested in, and you know more about than almost anyone, which is Toby Bradley Watson. Could there be a civil war in New Caledonia, and how has Macron played this so badly? So New Caledonia is a Polynesian island with a population of about 200,000 people, and it is part of France. It's had, I think, 3 referendums on independence, keeps voting to remain part of France. And these territories are part of France. We've discussed this in the past in a quite different way from the way that British overseas territories are part of Britain. It would be like Britain having a Polynesian island, which was as much part of Britain as Cumbria. Right? They send representatives to the assembly. They send their senators, run as part of France, which is why the collapse in New Caledonia and the violence in New Caledonia is felt pretty viscerally in France itself. And it's not the first time, because we've also had some problems about other French territories off the coast of Africa where we've had recent problems around migration and movement and voting rights. Anyway, over to you on New Caledonia.
Well, I'm touched that you described me as an expert. And there was you earlier talking about how, people are appointed to charge of China who've never been there. I've never been to New Caledonia. I cannot claim to be an expert.
And what do they actually call it New Caledonia, or do they call it something else?
Do you know? No, it's called La Nouvelle Calédonie. And do you know why? Because a Scottish explorer by the name of Cook was one of the first people to discover it. And given he was from Scotland, they decided to call it New Caledonia.
Very good.
As in Caledonia. So he went there many, many years ago. This week, 600 heavily armed gendarmes have been sent from France purely to secure one road. And that's the main artery going through the place. And the other big news, that the reason why this became sort of a huge deal.
So what's the fight about? So I had a lecture.
Well, the fight is kind of just is built and it's built and it's built. Partly economic, partly tribal, and also there are, despite these referendums that you talk about, there are occasionally these flare-ups of we don't want to be part of France anymore. So they've had to call off the Olympic torch. So part of France is it that just as we had the Olympic torch in 2012 go through the whole of the country, the Olympic torch was meant to be there at the weekend, and they decided it was just too risky, that it would just be provocative and cause
somebody would
a
capture
huge
it
thing,
and it never be released.
So they've cancelled that. So far, relatively low numbers of deaths. I think we're in the single figures, but hundreds have been injured in what are pretty vicious riots. And it's, Macron, the question sort of saying that Macron's getting a lot of flack. There is now a state of emergency. There's been a ban on TikTok because that was being used to.
But what does that mean? How do you ban TikTok? They shut it down?
You shut it down. You can't.
Can we shut down TikTok?
If we had to, yeah. Absolutely.
Shut it down.
But Rory, have you not been talking to these special groups anymore?
No, never told me I could shut off TikTok. In the interest of my children, I'd be quite keen to shut off TikTok.
Well, did I tell you, by the way, talking of that, I wanted to talk about this last week, but we just didn't get around to it. My friend in the Premier of South Australia, Peter Malinauskas, is bringing forward legislation to ban all 14-year-olds from having social media accounts, under 14.
So I'm in favour. Listen, I get in a lot of trouble for this. I basically think these things are really dangerous.
Yeah.
One of these people on my retreat, who's a software engineer, was like, I do not carry a phone anymore. I've deleted.
Sorry, I thought you were allowed to talk.
No, the very end, as
Okay.
we were leaving. He said, I'm a software engineer, don't carry a phone anymore. I've deleted all my apps because I know more than anyone that we design these apps to be addictive.
Yeah.
They're just designed to suck you in. And then I was talking to a mother yesterday with a young daughter, and she was like, her daughter is seeing a lot of male private parts that she does
absolutely.
not particularly want her daughter to be seeing on the thing.
I was in a school last week, City London Academy in Southwark, and I told them about this Australian Peter Malinauskas and this idea. So we had a little vote. We had a little sort of, pros and cons. We had a little vote, and banning won. And one of the girls who voted for the ban said, "I see things on my phone every day that I know I shouldn't see."
Yeah. I mean, there's a movement in the US, really well-organized movement, to stop people wait till 8, which I think is about stopping till 8th grade. But I think it should be pushed.
Oh, as opposed to 8 a.m. or 8 p.m.
Push much, much longer.
Yeah.
And but every time I have counterpointing people saying that the evidence isn't that compelling. There's no real evidence that has much effect. I think you just end up down a horrible, horrible tunnel. And my dream would be to kind of social interaction, nature, outside, something other than kind of doom scrolling on your phone.
Okay, well, we've gone from New Caledonia to TikTok
Okay, here's
to
a question
in Australia.
I'm going to push us towards, off your expertise use of New Caledonia. How do you think Joe Biden's reaction to the UCLA protests will impact the US election? Do you think Biden will have turned off a lot of young liberal voters? Who else would they vote for? Well, just to remind people, we've talked a little bit about these. These university protests in the US are absolutely huge and have become central to the debate. So I talked to you a little bit about how, I was teaching at Yale and I had students who were on the pro-Palestinian side, students who were on the pro-Israeli side, how Yale had to clear the students out or decided to clear the students out. The police arrived. One of my students was arrested. But this is being played out. I mean, Yale actually has handled it quite well. But it's being played out at a much, much bigger scale. And in UCLA, it got pretty violent. There were people going in with baseball bats, people masked. And Biden basically has expressed support for the authorities against the students. My friends who are very concerned about Israel are horrified when they look at these demonstrations because they think that the young students are ignorant, are endorsing Hamas, they hate the fact that there are flags up in favor of intifada or saying from the river to the sea. I have Jewish friends in London saying to me, how could these possibly be so ignorant? On the other side, I have pro-Palestinian students pointing out that trucks were driven through Yale and Harvard with their names and addresses and telephone numbers and faces, saying because they supported the pro-Palestinian protests, they should be tracked down and they should never be given a job. And Bill Ackerman, who's a big hedge fund guy, saying he's not going to employ these people. Lists being run, which apparently includes some of the biggest American hedge funds and banks. So one of the reasons why people are masked is not that they're proto-terrorists, it's that they actually want to be able to get a job when they leave university.
Yeah.
And then you have this whole question of how both sides are provoking each other. So, we had a case where somebody claimed to have been stabbed in the eye by a flag. The New York Times then reported it. Then it turned out it wasn't true. Other people are pushing through with social media, trying to catch, one side saying anti-Semitic stuff, other side saying genocidal stuff, but they're often standing there for 12 hours looking for that one moment where they can. Yeah. Anyway, what do you think?
I think in answer to Emily's question, do you think Biden will have turned off a lot of young liberal voters? I think there's no doubt about that. I guess the calculation he's making is that he's still in that position of trying to do his level best to influence Netanyahu and has decided, rightly or wrongly, that the way to do that is to be pretty supportive, even though Israel thinks he's not being supportive enough. And I think on the protests, you're right that they're far bigger in America. They do seem to have provoked far deeper political polarization. But we are seeing them more and more in the UK as well. I don't know if you follow the Marsh family, Rory, they sing very funny songs on Twitter. But they've done a very, very funny one about Suella Braverman. She took a GB News reporter to one of these tented protests, and they obviously knew she was coming. They just decided not to say a word to her. So she's sort of walking up and down the line, talking to the GB. They're going, "Hi, I'm Suella." And anyway, I think there is a real problem for progressive parties who are not a bit harder over in terms of what's been going on in the Middle East. And they're, I wonder whether we talked earlier about whether that's why David Lammy was much harder on the ICC than Andrew Mitchell.
And Labour's okay here because they're 20 points ahead on the polls. But in the case of Biden, of course, just to remind people.
Well, in Michigan, there's a big Arab vote there.
Yeah, brutal truth, which is that they're absolutely neck and neck at best. Trump may even slightly be in the lead. And as you say, these key swing states like Michigan, it all comes down to turnout. All comes down to turnout. And the problem is, if people are alienated and think, not in my name, I can't bear to vote for him, and just stay at home, Trump wins. And that, of course, is what's going to happen to the Conservatives. Most of the moderate Conservatives I know in Britain are not going to vote Labour. They're just going to stay at home.
Do you think some will vote Labour? Do people not feel they have to vote?
I think a lot of people just don't vote.
Really?
Because if you feel...
Even if they care about politics?
Well, so it's an interesting one. I mean...
But you couldn't not vote.
If you were really... I'd be tempted to not vote. If you were really pissed off with the Labour Party, when Jeremy Corbyn was in, you ever tempted to be like, I can't bear to vote for another party, but I'm not going to vote for
Well, I voted Lib
Corbyn.
Dem and the Europeans, and then I did vote Labour.
But you've never ever had a temptation of, I can't bear to vote Lib Dem, I'm just not going to vote at all.
No, I haven't. I think, and if I hadn't voted, I think I probably would have felt I had to go and vote Green or vote for an independent or something. I just feel you have to vote. I think it's a really bad thing not to vote.
There is this thing in the US writing in. I got my name.
Yeah.
I got my name written in US elections. Somebody wrote me in the congressional district in New York.
Did you win?
And no, I didn't get enough write-ins, sadly. Yeah.
Now, listen, maximum. We've talked about a lot about the age of Biden and Trump, but what about this one from Rich Herford? There's been much criticism of the age of the two US presidential candidates, yet in the UK, Queen Elizabeth continued to exercise government functions until her death at the age of 96. Do you think there should be a maximum age for a monarch to continue exercising functions?
Well, we do have a system actually in Britain which goes all the way back to George III, which is that if you conclude
Was
that
he the mad one?
Yeah, exactly. You conclude a monarch can't issue their functions properly, you have a regency. Where a regency steps
And who decides that? In the modern age, who would decide that?
Effectively the Prime Minister. Yeah. Be a councillor around the Prime Minister would decide it.
So it could have been Liz Truss.
Exactly. Could have been Liz Truss. So, and then normally what happens is that the heir would then step up and be the Prince Regent.
Right.
And
while the king was still alive.
Operate the role, yeah.
But not be Did you see the new portrait by Jonathan Yeo? Or was that while you were away?
No,
Have you not seen it yet?
No.
Oh, get up a picture for Rory. I mean, I am now going, because Rory's been in his retreat, he's yet to see the first official portrait of the king. Now, I have to say, I really like it. I think it's got the face really, really well. And I like the whole red stuff.
Oh, it's wonderful. Oh, I think that's lovely.
So you didn't even aware, you, the close friend of His Majesty, were not even aware that Jonathan Yeo had done this portrait.
No, I think that's splendid.
Yeah, I think it's splendid.
I think it's splendid. I mean, the only problem is, my father had his portrait painted when he was in his 80s, and he didn't like it at all. He kept saying, I look like an old man. So wait a sec, you're 88.
But Charles doesn't look.
Yeah,
he certainly doesn't look older than he is, and I think he's got his face really, really powerful.
Yeah, it's a very, very powerful, very striking.
And what do you make of the red? Is it blood? Is it Wales? What is it? What's going on there?
I think it's his military jacket leaking into the world.
The whole thing is red.
Yeah, it's his red military jacket leaking the world, and then there's a butterfly, isn't there? Mm. There's nature, and there's maybe a sunset.
Yeah, a bit of nature, definitely a bit of nature.
What
are the big news have you missed? Because that was a huge thing. It was all over the news for days.
I've missed pretty much everything, haven't I? I mean, I didn't know.
Who's won the Premier League?
I have no idea. Who's won the Premier League?
Do you not know who's won the Premier League?
Who's won the Premier League?
You really don't?
No. Who won the Premier League?
Manchester City.
And what's happened to your team?
I'm afraid we've been relegated. Right?
Oh,
While you were away, we were officially relegated.
And did David Gort get into this with you on Ipswich Town? Yeah.
They've been promoted.
Yeah.
And he's very happy.
Yeah.
And Darren Bent was discussed again. Maximum age, no, but possible if King Charles were to become debilitated, then Prince William steps up as a Prince Regent. That's what you're saying.
Yes. So here we are. At Xavier Turner XI4EB. Goodness, like a password. What are your views on the current situation in Wales involving Vaughan Gething? Vaughan Gething, for listeners, the new leader of Wales.
And the controversy that dogged him during the leadership election, which he won against his fellow minister, Jeremy Miles, is continuing to dog him.
And this is the one that we talked about, where essentially they'd stitched up the electoral rules around the union.
No, it was more the fact that he had this donation from somebody who'd been convicted of environmental offences, and it sort of isn't going away. So it's being raised again and again in the Welsh Parliament, and it's just one of those stories that seems to be hanging around him. So I don't know whether at some point he's going to, I think we're talking about 200,000 quid. But, we'll just have to see whether it's one of those things that blows over and he toughs it out or not.
And what's your sense on these kind of scandals? If you were giving professional media advice, how do you know whether a scandal is actually something crippling, where eventually, I'm really sorry, you're going to have to step down. This is just getting in the way of everything. Or whether it's, don't worry about it, it'll blow over. It'll be next morning's fish and chips.
Because the pace of the news cycle is now so much faster than it used to be, I think on the one hand, it's possible to survive much more. But on the other hand, if something keeps coming back and keeps coming back and keeps coming back, then it can become unbearable for the individual and it can become debilitating for the administration. I don't think he's near that yet. I don't think he's remotely near that. But I think that's what his opponents are trying to do.
And
it's exactly what the right wing are trying to do to Angela Rayner in relation to this council.
What determines whether these things come back and back and back or
not? Political will, journalism, whether the media keep going at something. I think one of the reasons why this government's got itself into such a mess is because the media has not kept on at stuff which the public, every time it does come back, are reminded, oh God, yeah, they did that as well. So I think that's why sometimes you can benefit from a more robust media, because once you're through it, in a sense, you can be strengthened by it. Let's say, for example, that this Angela Rayner thing goes nowhere. Because the right have made such a big thing of it, it could ultimately end up strengthening her.
Gotcha.
As she comes through it. So it depends, but I don't know who's really pushing this, whether it's the media, whether it's his political opponents externally or internally, whether it's a bit of a mix of both. But it's certainly within the Welsh media, it's there as a kind of a bit of a cloud over him the whole time.
Right. Okay. So Dutch government, we talked about this incredible result in Holland, where Geert Wilders, who was elected first to the Dutch Parliament in 1997, who's a classic populist, which, as listeners to the rest of politics remember, means that he has crazy hair. Donald Trump, Milei in Argentina, Boris Johnson.
Who's been... Have you seen what he said about the Spanish Prime Minister's wife?
Oh, what did he say about the Spanish?
So Milei, another thing, I think you might have just been coming out of the retreat at this point. Milei went to this sort of far-right love-in in Madrid, hosted by Vox, and he was like, Maloney was there and Le Pen was there.
Yeah, and just again to remind people, Vox is the far-right Spanish party, basically dominated by macho cigar-smoking Spaniards. Yeah.
With hair.
Some
of them are very, very bald. Have you noticed that? So they've either got very big hair or they're bald.
Or in American populist politics, my great heroes often go into prison bald, come out with amazing new hair, and then re-win their elections as mayors. That was true in Rhode Island. It was true the very corrupt.
They go to prison and grow hair.
Yeah.
So they get a wig.
So the mayor of Bridgeport, Connecticut, who was prosecuted for various forms of fraud and corruption, sent to prison, came out of prison again, and re-emerged with this incredible sort of lacquered piece.
So was it a wig?
Well, it was obviously a wig, but it's amazing, the thing, all over his head.
You say obviously a wig. I mean, I'm sure you're well aware, Rory, who Scott Brown is.
Oh, go on then.
Former Celtic and Scotland footballer. He, when he was a player, was completely bald.
Yeah.
And he suddenly emerged with a full head of hair. And it's not a wig.
It's not a wig?
When he was a player, he was one of the most intimidating footballers going. And part of his intimidation was that people thought he was completely bald, shaved head.
Well, no, this guy's
he could now be the mayor.
So this guy, the guy from Bridgeport's actually terrific. We should talk about it more because he's the guy that he decided to come out of prison, ran again to be mayor. The judge caught him on film with one of his supporters stuffing a ballot box, so suspended the election, held the election again stuffing the ballot box, held the election a third time and has won. Anyway, so he's now back in as the mayor of Bridgeport, Connecticut. We should interview him because he's the kind of leading politician that we need. Good old boy. Anyway, a lot of hair.
Should we get back to the Netherlands?
Back to Geert Wilders. So Geert Wilders, far-right politician, makes outrageous comments about Islam, very much stirs up far-right populists, a sort of marginal figure in Dutch politics, and then managed to get more votes than anybody else in the Dutch election. So he was in a position to form a government. We've now got to a situation of, and here's the question. Tony, please explain the new Dutch government coalition. Why would Wilders pick a former Labour minister, Ronald Plasterk, to be the new PM? And why would Ronald accept the invite to lead a right-wing government?
Okay, now first of all, you went off on one so long about the American guy with the hair that I didn't complete my point about Millet.
Oh yes.
Millet
Yeah.
went to this thing and basically said that the Spanish Prime Minister's wife was corrupt.
Oh, right.
And the Spanish have now called in the Argentine ambassador and formal complaint, and announced essentially that Argentine-Spanish relations are now in the deep freeze.
Oh my goodness.
Until Millet apologises. Now, Wilders, so the question, I think if we wind back a few weeks, Rory, you said very confidently on this podcast that there's no way they could stop Wilders being the Prime Minister.
That's true, I did say that. I was wrong.
And I think they'd find it very, very hard to stomach that. Yeah. So basically what's happened is he has agreed not to be Prime Minister. He'll obviously be a big player in the background, and that 4 right-wing parties have come together and they are going to form the government. There's his party, the far-right PVV, there's the Farmers' Party, BBB, there's the Liberal, WD, and there's the Anti-Corruption Party, NSC. So they have come together and they will be the government. I think they're going to find it very hard to hold this together because you're talking about people who are not used to government. Now, the guy that they're putting in as Prime Minister, as per the question, Ronald Plasterk, he's a former Education and Interior Minister who is, like a lot of people in politics, has been on something of a journey. And his journey now looks like it might be taking him to the head of the most right-wing government in the history of the Netherlands. The question, why has he done that? I think he's done it because, they've asked him to be Prime Minister, and they're trying something quite interesting, which they've not tried for many, many, many decades. It's in fact probably over 100 years, where they're going to have a government made up of half politicians, half expert outsiders, which is something
I like. Yeah.
So maybe you should put your name in.
Yeah, then volunteer.
Go and work for Wilders. What do you think?
Absolutely. No, maybe not. So Wilders presumably still has extraordinary influence because he controls that party absolutely. His party is one of those odd things that isn't a real political party. It's a bit like Farage's party, which is sort of one person Wilders.
And he also said that, so this is what has held it up, is we're over 200 days. It's been a long time, a fair long time since the election. And this thing has been about, these parties saying they will not have him as Prime Minister. So when he announced the deal, he said, "Do not forget, I will become Prime Minister of the Netherlands one day with the support of even more Dutch." So he's seeing this as the latest chapter on his long journey. But I suspect that what normally happens when these populist coalitions form is that they fail pretty quickly. We'll see if that happens this time. Jonathan Smith, does lack of local and regional newspapers weaken democracy? For example, in our police crime commissioner election, I've no idea who I was voting for, not so much as a leaflet. Websites just don't cut it. Very good point.
It's a hugely important point. So basically, Britain has gone from a very, very rich network of regional newspapers and actually regional radio too, strong local BBC stations, this, that and the other. So even as recently as 2010, when I was starting in Cumbria, Cumberland and Westmoreland Herald, read by almost everybody in my constituency, would report on the centre of my constituency, 27,000 people, and it did everything from 25 years on in the local school to reporting on the agricultural fairs, but also getting on top of the campaign to save the local fire station or scandals involving me. And, I got to write a column and my opponents got to write columns, and it was a very vigorous thing, right? By the time I was stepping down, all this stuff was in trouble. Advertising collapsing. These newspapers are beginning to get unified. They're getting thinner and thinner. They have fewer and fewer reporters. The quality is beginning to go down. And the result is that our local democracy really depends on knowing who these people are, following up. It's a scandal in the A&E. Do you report on it? Rory Stewart claimed he was going to duel the A66. Has he duelled the A66 or not? And that stuff's gone. So I think it is a problem. How are you supposed to vote? How are you supposed to hold people to account? Because sure as eggs is eggs, the national newspapers are not going to report in detail on the performance of police and crime commissioner in Bradford, are they?
No, this is something I talked about at this event in Scotland. We were talking about the different, I think it's a good thing, devolution, and there should be more of it, but people don't fully understand the different layers of our democracy. And if you don't have a kind of media debate that's explaining them, how are we supposed to educate ourselves? For example, I saw the editor of the Press and Journal it was a paper based in Aberdeen, which actually was one of the first to recognise that the digital route was probably where they were going to go. And they have built up a very, very sizable number of subscribers, which is fine. In most areas, that hasn't happened. They've been hit massively by advertising because of the whole sort of Facebook revolution. The newspaper groups have become, the big giants have become owners of more and more local newspapers. They don't really care about the localities. It's just another thing for the bottom line. So I think it's a terrible danger to our democracy. And I also think that there are huge success stories though. If I look at the Camden New Journal we've got two very, very good local papers. We've got the Camden New Journal, which is a very campaigning sort of newspaper. Got the Hampstead and Highgate Express, which is a pretty old-fashioned traditional newspaper. And they do, they're proper local newspapers. And I think we lose them at our peril. And I think there is, however, also this space for kind of more active, campaigny, citizen-type journalism to come in. But it's not going to replace that old-fashioned, here are the 11 candidates, this is what they're saying, this is what they believe, and this is what you've seen of them in the past, the past couple of years, whatever it may be, where they're building a profile.
Well, thank you, Alastair, on this theme of local newspapers. And maybe just to finish, maybe a little bit of a thought as we go into the next section. What could given that we agree that they're important, what could an incoming government do to actually provide a bit more support for local newspapers, local radio? I mean, I'd like to see, license fee, BBC, really, could you really lean into saying, actually, you've really got to invest in BBC Cumbria as part of your license fee agreement?
Well, that's not happening, is it? They're cutting there as well. Yeah, but can you imagine the politics behind governments investing in local newspapers? I mean, they kind of do it in the advertising.
You give tax breaks. You can give. I mean, I don't know. Anyway, something to think about.
Yeah, good. See you soon.
See you soon.